Today on Inspired Money.
I think it's still something I'm coming to learn and understand and sort of wrap my head around, is that the way that data is now a currency. The way that it's not about having the coolest algorithm. It's nothing without the data for it to learn on. And so I think that's a transformation that's going to have to happen in people thinking about this in their heads before they can actually assess the ethical issues. Like, what does it mean to think of data as a currency? And what does it mean that China has more of that currency for ethics?
This is episode 120 with Associate Professor of Philosophy at Northeastern University, John Basl.
Welcome to Inspired Money. My name is Andy Wong, a managing partner at Runnymede Capital Management. Each week, we bring you an interesting person to help you get inspired, shift your perspectives on money, and achieve incredible things. From making it to giving it away, Inspired Money means making a difference, creating something bigger than oneself, and maybe, just maybe, making the world a better place. Thank you for joining me.
Hey, Inspired Moneymaker. Welcome back. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. We've got a great guest on the show today. We're talking to John Basl, a philosophy professor from Northeastern University. During the 2019-2020 academic year, he's an AI Initiative Fellow in Residence. That's a joint program between the Edmund J. Safra Center for Ethics and the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard University. John caught my attention because he gave a talk at the Inbound Marketing Conference in Boston. The title of his talk was Ethics in the Age of Information and AI. In this episode, you'll learn how philosophers approach things and study things, how to apply philosophy and ethics to technology, including artificial intelligence, and why we need to think about the benefits of AI and information technologies while avoiding the ethical costs. Now, let's get inspired with John Basl. John, welcome to Inspired Money. I'm so excited to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, Andy. It's a pleasure to be here.
Let's jump right in. What's your earliest childhood memory of money?
That is an interesting question. I don't think a lot about money. I mean, I probably think about money less than your usual audience, but I have this memory of seeing a car commercial early on, and there's always this, if you buy this car, you get $1,000 back. And I remember thinking, if they're giving you $1,000 back, that must be more than the cost of a car. So I had no idea the real value of those things. And so I just remember talking to one of my parents about it and saying, we should get one of these. They're giving you more than it's worth back. And then they had to talk to me about how expensive things got. Yeah.
So you got an education that cars are worth more than $1,000.
That's what I learned. Yep.
Otherwise, yes, you could have done that all day.
I know. I was an entrepreneur early.
So is your title Associate Professor of Philosophy, or am I looking at an old title?
That is my title. I am a new Associate Professor of Philosophy. I was an assistant professor until June or something like that.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, it's very exciting.
Tell us a little bit about your path to academia.
Yeah. So I started as a biology major in college. I went to Northeastern University, which has what's called a co-op program. So you can intern, but a longer one, so 6 months. And I was taking biology classes and they were going fine. But the questions I really cared about were like deep theoretical questions in evolutionary biology. Like, how does evolution work? How should we conceptualize it? Does it happen to groups or just individuals? These kinds of questions that maybe the selfish gene talks about or something like that. And I did my first co-op and I was really bored. Right after that co-op, I changed my major and I floundered for a while, spent some time not really knowing what I was going to do. And I took my first philosophy class, which was moral philosophy. And right after the first day, the professor said, we're going to answer these deep theoretical questions using a really rigorous method. And that really attracted me. And so from then on, I just took almost only philosophy because I had finished all my other prereqs by being a bio major. Then I went to grad school at UW-Madison, where I split my time between working on those theoretical questions in evolution and moral questions having to do with the environment, and spent a lot of time thinking about pretty deeply theoretical issues about what's called moral status. So we have obligations to others. What is it about you that grounds obligations? Like, why do I have to be nice to you? What about you makes that the case? And why don't I have to be nice to my book bag? But then I started doing stuff in the ethics of emerging technologies pretty early on. And at first I was drawn by sort of really interesting sci-fi questions having to do with moral status. So could we ever create a robot such that I had to be nice to it? And what would that be like? And that got me really thinking about the AI space a lot, and then start to think about the more on the ground problems having to do with AI fairness and AI transparency and autonomous vehicle ethics. And that's sort of how I got to where I'm working on now.
And these are things that many of us don't think about because as emerging technologies, a lot of the time we don't see it yet, or it's not reaching a point where you say, okay, does this robot have feelings? We don't see that in our day-to-day life.
No, yeah, we sometimes see it in movies, but it's not really part of our reality. Yeah, the ethical issues, we're always lagging behind on ethics. We get really, what's going on in research venues is just too far away from us just yet to even be thinking about publicly ethically. And sometimes the researchers are so excited about what they can do that they're not yet thinking about ethics. Although I think that culture is starting to change a little bit. I think we learned a lot from mistakes we made in the bioengineering revolution. And so I think researchers are much more sensitized to ethical issues. But it's definitely, we got a ways to go before the public has access to the information to even think about the ethical issues that these new technologies raise.
Are you looking at both spaces, the bioengineering as well as AI and like computing technology?
Yeah, in the past, I did some work in neural ethics. So if we're going to give people cognitive enhancement drugs, what kind of ethical issues does that raise? So memory enhancement, things like that. And so I thought a lot about that space previously. Now I mostly focus on just AI ethics stuff. But yeah, I have thought broadly in that space.
As a researcher, are you trying to get ahead of it? It's something that people need to be prepared for even before we get there.
My inclination, like many philosophers, is there's really cool theoretical puzzles and we want to solve those. And those are often very divorced from actually doing something on the ground to actually prevent an ethical disaster. We just want to know the certain truths, although many of us do care about the world too. So it's relatively new for me to sort of start thinking like, how do I take my theoretical knowledge in moral philosophy and translate it to workable solutions for these actual problems that marketers and business people and technologists confront?
But you're starting to see that convergence happening.
Absolutely.
We're here at Inbound, a marketing conference, and you told me that you've spoken at HubSpot before. What is it that marketers need to think about in terms of ethics?
This happens a lot with me where people will learn I'm an ethicist and they'll say, will you come give a talk to us? And I'll say, sure, what about? And they'll say something like, what happened at HubSpot is they wanted to talk on UX design ethics. And I thought, well, I don't know anything about that. And I looked around to see if I could recommend someone else, but nobody has written anything on that. It's just not a thing. So I had to sort of think from the ground up, like, what are marketers doing? What are UX designers up to that raises ethical issues? And how does that interact with stuff I actually do know about? And so there I thought a lot about, I do know something in the literature about manipulation and consent. And since UX designers are presenting frameworks that users make choices in, that aligns with other areas where users are presented with data and have to make choices, like they're presented with information about a scientific experiment and have to consent or not. And so when I went to the UX talk at HubSpot, I talked a bit about how do we think about preserving autonomy? When you're a UX designer, are you making choices that undermine people's autonomy? And what problems does that raise? And how can you be sensitive to that while still accomplishing your end of selling a product?
What's a real world example of that?
Of manipulation and
of like the UX designer, what they're doing and how it impacts the user. The thought that needs to go into, is there an ethical issue there or not?
Yeah. How about think about the last time you tried to cancel a service that you paid for, and the level of difficulty in unsubscribing from that. So marketers and UX designers know that if they make it sufficiently difficult and sufficiently confusing, they can continue to get subscriptions. So you want to figure out, is it okay to hide those options? How transparent do you have to be in making those options? Should you require a call in so that they have to actually talk to someone? This doesn't just happen in UX design, it happens in all sorts of domains where you have to try, when you want to cancel a service.
A subscription, yes.
Yeah, right. So I think that's a case where it seems to me that it's okay that I have to click twice to cancel, but it's another thing when the box says yes, but no, or something like that. And so there's actually stuff on sort of how those things are organized that influences our choices. And sometimes the influence can be so great that it undermines our ability to actually really make a choice.
It reminds me of trying to cancel my cable and internet. Like, you can't just do it. They send you to a customer retention team who makes it very, very difficult to leave.
Very difficult. but sometimes via minor incentives, sometimes via transferring you around. And so that's a good case. Like, so imagine you're trying to cancel a service, and one approach is, we're going to offer incentives to try to get you to stay. So I'll offer you a 1 year with a $10 discount or something. And the other one is just going to try to talk you into it, but then hang up the phone and make you call back, and they don't cancel your service until you called back a sufficient number of times. Those seem ethically very different to me. And so thinking about that in the UX space you could have a similar kind of analogy.
There's no governing body that's policing this. This is self-imposed by a corporation, and it makes me think of Google, who no longer has this motto, but don't be evil.
That's right. Yeah, that's good. I mean, one of the things that I'm talking about here at Inbound in my talk on how to build sort of AI ethics oversight and infrastructure is that the current model we have in many domains for ethics is just legal compliance. Like, as long as you're in compliance with the law, who's to say otherwise? But next time you get in a fight with your partner or a friend, tell them what you did was not illegal and see if that's sufficient. Legal compliance is just not enough. We know that doing the right thing requires doing more than that. And there are really hard questions about how do we incentivize corporations to do the right thing other than just telling them to do the right thing. Ethics is starting to matter to the public enough that it's going to be a matter of managing risk and building trust with your customer base, that you're going to have to try to think through these ethical issues. And ethics itself is going to become a kind of currency.
So as you do a lot of research, how much of it is trying to project into the future and predicting a potential problem versus looking at what exists right now, and there should be a line drawn between right and wrong?
Part of our training is thinking about weird possibilities and what to think about them. So it's easy for me to hear about a technology and what it can do and then think about the deep consequences and whether that's going to be problematic.
It's a little of both, it sounds like.
Yeah, but then there's the question of like, well, what do we do about this particular application, this particular use case? And so I think there's no sort of just drawing a line like this technology is right or wrong or problematic or not. Like, I really think like saying something like we should not use biotechnology or we should not use machine learning is not the right approach. You got to hear all the details about the specific application and the values that are in conflict and make a careful decision about that thing, which is how we all sort of navigate the choices in our lives. But it's much harder to think that way about technological spaces. We just sort of want to make a judgment about the space generally.
What are your views on Facebook, Cambridge Analytica, and elections? Does that fit into the work that you do?
It fits in the sense that like the people that I work with work on that. That's not a specific area of expertise for me. I have a colleague, Kay Matthias, that thinks a lot more about that particular issue. But that is one of my deepest concerns, even though it's not an area of my research, is the impact on democracy of AI and ML technologies, or just targeted advertising or targeted news articles. And it seems like part of a functioning, well-running democracy, to the extent that we can have one, presupposes shared communication between citizens. And to the extent that we're all in information bubbles and can't interact, that's problematic. And then the fact that corporations or government can target specific people to get them to make certain choices in really precise ways, and not just targeting groups of people, but particular individuals to influence them in the most effective ways, this kind of manipulation that seems problematic. And so I worry a lot about that.
Did you watch the documentary, The Big Hack?
No, not yet. It's on my list.
which tried to show a little background into Cambridge Analytica and what took place. And I'm just not sure. I don't know if the ethical question there is who owns the personal information that's all part of the big data.
That's certainly one question. I mean, one of the things about the AI space that's interesting is that it really challenges us to rethink about certain values. So like one thing we care a lot about is privacy. It's protected by the GDPR. We think one of the problems of AI is a privacy concern, but it's not privacy in the traditional sense. It's not like what AI does is sneaks into your house and looks at your personal stuff. It takes information about others, finds out some superficial stuff about you, and then makes really targeted predictions about you. It can sort of, my colleague says it's like Sherlock Holmes. It sees some superficial features of you, but it's so good at deduction that it then learns deep insights about you. So it's not like it invaded your privacy in in the traditional sense. So we have to sort of rethink what we even care about, or how we should think about privacy given the technology.
Well, that sounds like the sci-fi Minority Report, where crimes are being predicted before they happen.
Yeah, except there's real world cases. So I don't know, you know about the Target pregnancy prediction case? So Target was I might mess up some of the details, so don't hold me to these. But there are two cases, actually. So one is Target was sending this person targeted ads for things like diapers and baby food. And the woman and her parents were very upset, like, why are you doing this? But it turns out her previous purchases correlated high. She didn't even know she was pregnant. It turned out she was. So this algorithm predicted that. The other case was a woman who was pregnant. And this is a case where algorithms just fail to make predictions, and it's really harmful. The pregnancy terminated unintentionally, but she was still part of these targeted ad campaigns, so she kept having to get advertisements for these things. So yeah, it is a little minority reporty, but at the same time, some of it exists. I mean, everybody's worried that your phone is constantly listening and then targeting ads. And maybe it is, I don't know. But it could also just be, it's so good at predicting the things I want that it's showing me the things that I'm talking about.
Yeah, I've heard both arguments. I mean, I think the anecdotal evidence, people say, oh, for sure, it's listening. But I think the experts all say that it is just good predictive tools. Many people don't realize that this technology is here and it exists already, because it's surprising to hear that a retailer like Target would have that technology that's being implemented today.
I think the public's understanding of the technology is lagging behind. Like, I mean, just even understanding how machine learning algorithms work is a conceptual paradigm shift from the way we think about traditional programming. And really understanding the scariness of these technologies means sort of understanding that and not thinking that there's someone behind the scenes doing any programming that gets the results, that there's machine learning going on, and understanding how that works and like getting the public to understand that is going to be a key ethical challenge, I think.
So as you study AI, are you trying to look at like, how do you use AI for good versus AI for bad? Because it seems like a gray area that's, it's a moving target. It's not always binary and simple.
It's definitely not simple. Whether it's binary, I think is a question of the particular question we're asking. Like, so I think it's common to think of philosophers as people think it's all gray area. And I think that's actually pretty uncommon. We think there are right and wrong answers in these cases. We just think they're so hard and we're never sure which one's right. So it's sort of two different things going on in my research. In my research, when I'm thinking about a particular problem, I'm trying to defend a specific answer to a specific question. Like, it is permissible or it is okay to use this technology in this way, in this context. But when I'm thinking about giving information to people working in the AI space, what I want to develop is a set of tools they can use to try to work through the problems to get at not the worst answers, right? So there's a set of better answers and a set of worse answers. And really what matters is that we have a set of tools to start a set of conversations so we can come up to some consensus about roughly where we should end up and how we should try to get there. And there, I think that once it's not just me thinking about my particular problems in my particular research paper, but getting you to agree with me, that's where we have to start admitting some ambiguity and gray area and coming to collective decisions that may not be what any particular individual agrees with. But we went through this process. We thought about the values in a particular way.
When you're writing papers, I think that, the average person is not, like, it's not impacting their life. They're not finding your work and reading it and synthesizing it and trying to understand and come up with their own thoughts and conclusions. Because your work is more likely to be found in an academic journal than People magazine.
You're absolutely right. But I think that's not uncommon in all disciplines. Like, science is like that too. If you went and read any particular researcher's scientific papers, they'd be, to the person outside of that science lab or that community, would be extremely boring and seem not to matter. But I think every intellectual community has different levels of things going on. So there's the people doing the deep theoretical research, and they're trying to discover little bits of knowledge that then can be used by some people that can synthesize knowledge across the domain. And eventually you get to these popularizers who can put that information out there in an accessible way. And philosophy's been pretty bad at that. And we're Northeastern Ethics Institute's really trying to bridge that gap. So I'm actually trying to, and it's been an exercise, write papers that are for not my intellectual community of philosophers, but for the world. So hopefully they will read it and have thoughts about it and will change their lives. But it's true that that's not what research is typically about for philosophers or me.
Coming up, we talk about China enforcing ethics and where we are ethically as a country. All that and much more right after this short break. The The show notes for this episode can be found at inspiredmoney.fm/120. If you're listening in your car, wherever you are, check the show notes if you want to learn more about John or other things mentioned in this episode. It's time for the Runnymede Money Tip of the Week. Have you started your holiday shopping? The holiday season is definitely here, and while it's a special time to spend with family and friends, it can also be a stressful time of year for many people. According to the Union Bank Holiday Spending Survey, out of 1,000 U.S. consumers, 77% are concerned about overspending. It's at this time of year that you're more likely to feel pressured to overspend and make poor financial decisions. Also, according to the survey, 66% of people are planning to give openable presents to those on their list. But what do people receiving gifts really want? 51% would prefer gift cards, 45% want cash, and it's just 41% looking for a present that they can open. What's your preference? What do you want this holiday season? For me, I kind of like the idea of gift cards. There are several ways that you can buy discounted gift cards so you can save a little bit on your holiday budget. Or if there are specific stores and restaurants that you go to, you could buy some for yourself and save money during the year. Just be careful not to use gift cards like free money. Now, in my family, we don't buy a lot of gift cards, but our kids love California Pizza Kitchen. So as an example, at Costco, you can buy two $50 CPK gift cards for $79.99. In essence, you're saving 20%. You can also join the CPK Rewards program, where you earn 1 point for every dollar spent. And I think that for every 75 points, you get a $5 reward back. Costco, Sam's Club, and other big box stores, they sell a variety of discounted gift cards throughout the year. According to Investopedia.com, there are online sites like giftcards.com, Cardpool, Raise, and CardCash. They're just a few of many websites that sell discounted gift cards. Here you can access hundreds of merchant gift cards, and the discounts might be as low as 0 to 2% and could be as high as 35%. You need to do a little sleuthing for what store you're looking for and how much you can save. I'll leave a link to this Investopedia article in the show notes. It's entitled The Best Sites for Discounted Gift Cards. So I want to remind you that you can use the holidays as an opportunity to talk about money. We can learn and adopt better financial habits that just might help us throughout the year. That's the Runnymede Money Tip of the Week. Inspired Money is brought to you by Runnymede Capital Management. We help you to plan, invest, and worry less. If you have questions about money or have a comment about this show, send me a message at inspiredmoney.fm/Andy. I'd love to hear from you. You're listening to Inspired Money. I'm Andy Wong. You mentioned that there have been some mistakes in like bioengineering, and your work is more focused on AI. Different countries have different rules, different regulations. Certain countries are pushing the envelope further than others, and it's very difficult to control that.
Yeah.
Again, there's not an international governing body that is able to make standards or rules and enforce them. So what does that mean for AI? Do you look at what's happening with artificial intelligence in China versus the US?
So there's a lot going on in that question. Yeah, there's certainly this there is this concern about enforcement mechanisms. Like even if you tell people what the right thing to do is, but you can't, and you get people in Silicon Valley to agree, if China doesn't agree, first of all, that gives them a competitive advantage over Silicon Valley. But also, if they just decide to do things, then what are you going to do? How do you think about that? I mean, I think there is a really an important discussion that has to go on about building incentive structures to try to stop that kind of thing. And the scariest version of this is actually geoengineering, I think. Climate change is happening. If you inject enough sulfides into the atmosphere, you can block enough sunlight to stop some of the effects. And a company or a country could just do that unilaterally. And that just doesn't seem like the kind of choice a particular country should just opt into, absent the consensus of others.
Is that taking place? Geoengineering?
Yeah. There are geoengineering exercises and research, and there's local weather manipulation via these technologies already. So during the Olympic Games, China used it to try to ensure that there wouldn't be rain on the opening ceremony.
I didn't know if that was a myth.
No, I'm pretty sure it's true. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
In an absence of an international body, it sounds like one just needs to educate people because society as a whole is kind of trying to make some decisions.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of things that have to happen. One is an informed set of citizens and consumers that can make choices, but they also need to be provided with manageable information that they can use. So one solution might be some sort of external certification board that's not government mandated, but I don't know if you've been to Whole Foods, but if you go to the meat section of Whole Foods, there are grades 1 through 5 for how ethical or what ethical standards are imposed on the meat. And maybe we need something like that for data use or for prediction algorithms or something like that. So people can choose between different companies based on their sort of ethics rating. And that's what I've said earlier about ethics becoming a kind of currency, that companies will trade in some predictive accuracy or some features in order to be able to give consumers what they want in terms of ethics. And you see this a little bit. So there's the Fair phone. Do you know about this phone? It's a cell phone where all the parts are sourced in sustainable or ethical ways. They don't take advantage of as bad labor practices and things like that. And the phone sells because people are willing to take a hit on the and use second gen components in order to be ethical.
What are your thoughts on AI, China versus US? I mean, it seems like, well, there's a trade war taking place right now. And under the hood, some of that is related to technology and like cell phone infrastructure and what kind of cell phone networks there are. And I know that many of the Chinese companies, as well as companies in the US like Google and Amazon, they put a lot of money into artificial intelligence research and development.
Sure. Yeah, that's right. You probably know more about the difference in the context than me in terms of the underlying contours of the technologies that they're fighting about and what the impacts are. So I don't have a ton to say about that particular topic. I want to be hesitant about making any pronouncements about what side is doing the right thing in this context, only because I don't have enough information.
I know that China being a socialist government, the citizens there tend to be more willing to give up privacy. Yes. And they're willing to share their data for the benefit of going to a store and the experience being more efficient. I think that Americans, a little bit not sure. Like if you discuss it and think about it, may have some objections depending on how it's being used. They're going to have more boundaries, but I think a lot of Americans, we don't think about it either. And as long as it's sort of behind the scenes and there's a convenience, when I use my cell phone and I'm using social media, I give up a lot of information without even thinking about it.
Yeah, I'm particularly bad about this. I'll just basically opt into anything Google offers if it makes my life just the tiniest bit easier, even though philosophically I know that this is the wrong approach. I have students of mine that are like, John, what are you doing? Don't do that. Yeah, I think there's this fascinating challenge of thinking about, so there's these different cultural norms and they influence what we'll find acceptable or not. And there's an interesting challenge of thinking about, because we don't think cultural norms are always valid or matter, right? It doesn't like cultural norms override. It's not like we should make way for white supremacy or anything like that. So that cultural norm doesn't matter. So thinking about when the technology should be sensitive to cultural norms and when not is a hard and important question. But it could turn out that it's given the broad consensus about cultural values in China, certain technologies are permissible there that aren't permissible here. Now, that's not to say that something like the social credit system is permissible there. That's a different challenge.
Yeah, and I think the second part of that is that given those cultural differences and population size difference, the data set that you have matters. And if you look at China, you have people who are more willing to give up their information. You have a bigger population. They have a bigger data set. That seems powerful for AI development, like an advantage.
It does seem like an advantage. It also, the more data you have, the more accurate your predictions are. So you can actually get around some problems by having a huge data set too. So there's some ways that they might be less ethically challenging because of the size of the data set. Of course, it also enables them to do things that are more problematic. So yeah, that's certainly a competitive question. I mean, I think it's still something I'm coming to learn and understand and sort of wrap my head around, is that the way that data is now a currency, the way that it's not about having the coolest algorithm. It's nothing without the data for it to learn on. And so I think that's a transformation that's going to have to happen in people thinking about this in their heads before they can actually assess the ethical issues. Like, what does it mean to think of data as a currency? And what does it mean that China has more of that currency for ethics?
What can the average person do to learn more? And what are like 3 key points that you think that people should be aware of that they might not be at this time?
It's hard to say how to do this because philosophers are so bad about providing this service, but there are resources out there for thinking better about ethics. So one thing citizens do is stop thinking that ethics is just a gut check and it's my ethics and your ethics. There are better and worse arguments. I think we recognize that when we engage with one another and try to convince each other of things, that we recognize that there are reasons we can use to make a moral case for things. And so just recognizing that there's a toolkit to be built there, I think is an important thing for citizens to recognize. Another thing that I think is important for citizens is developing a kind of technological competence. Really understanding the technologies they use, which is a very difficult ask because it is kept opaque from them, sometimes for legitimate reasons and sometimes for illegitimate reasons. And because they're complicated. And then I guess maybe a third point would be something like, don't think about the ethics of AI. Think about the ethics of particular applications of AI or particular uses of AI, but let's not try to sort of paint with such a broad brush, because even though AI raises huge numbers of challenges, the benefits are also awesome. It can improve our lives in many ways. It can have health benefits and security benefits and convenience benefits. And so we really need to start thinking about when we have conversations about these things, let's pick a thing that we want to talk about and think about whether it's good or bad. Like, is Facebook's use of this data to do this thing, is that morally problematic or not? Rather than think, should Facebook have access to any data or use any AI? I think that will be more productive if we sort of narrow our conversations.
And then if you have a situation where you feel like, yes, I think that Facebook should not be using the data in this way, what can one do? Just refuse to use Facebook?
Well, there's a question about that like, that's the kind of philosophical problem that I really love, is like, well, you not using Facebook does not matter to Facebook. You not using it, right? It's got to be a big collection. So do you have an obligation not to use it given that you can't affect it? Should you give up the benefits of Facebook, such as they are? Would they pay no costs? So I don't know if that's the right answer, but certainly voting, talking to your congressman, talking to other people. For me, the way I make impact in the world is by talking to my students and not telling them what the right view is, but just doing that thing about building an ethical toolkit to solve these things on their own. And so I think if you think Facebook's essentially problematic, not being part of Facebook can be useful as a signaling tool to tell others, like, I think this is problematic. But the other things you have to do are engage in the political and community processes to try to get change made. Write annoying emails to Facebook and write op-eds to your local paper. The same thing it seems so daunting, I think, in part because Facebook's so big. It's like thinking you can change the government or something like that, which is a scary thought in itself.
Yeah, that's why I ask. It's like, if I decide not to use Facebook, I'm just one person and it really doesn't make an impact. But if you have groups of people doing that, then it does make a difference. I mean, there is some like democratic process whereby more than one person starts voting with their actions.
That's right. Yeah. I think a lot of times getting the right thing done is a matter of community organization.
As a philosophy professor and one who focuses on ethics, if it's a dial, is our nation becoming any less ethical? Like, does that dial move based on research?
You mean like, does philosophy end up feeding up into the world and making us better in some ways?
No, I think specifically, a lot of people, like, we're in such a politicized climate, and there are people who are like, okay, I'm right, or I'm left, or I'm pro-environment, or I don't care. And people worry about that ethics are not being paid attention to, or people's sort of ethical barometer is shifting so that, I don't know, maybe we are doing worse things than we used to. Like, does that needle move?
I see. I think I don't know how to. I think there's a lot of different needles or dials, and in some ways we're getting better, in some ways we're getting worse, and in some ways we're not really sure where we are just yet. But then coming to think, like, where are we in terms of the sort of ethic? Are we getting better overall ethically? I think I don't know.
It's a huge question.
Yeah, it's a huge question, and I think it's probably more effective to just pick the needle you think matters most and try to get it to move in the right direction.
It's like Mother Teresa saying, just take care of your own family. Just start with your family and take care of your family.
Yeah, it's got to be broader than that. I don't want it to be that narrow because we do have this tendency to sort of make sure we're okay and then sort of stop there, or our ethical worldview can be too short-sighted. But certainly there's something to focusing our efforts. It's really hard for any individual person to be ethically perfect, be a moral saint. There's just too many things to deal with.
Yes, that is impossible.
Yeah. Unfortunately.
We're all human.
That's right.
We make a lot of mistakes.
That's right.
And you just hope that you learn.
That's right. Yeah.
John, I like to ask all the Inspired Money guests, how do you define success?
Oh man, that's a hard question. This is the boring philosopher answer. It's so domain specific. So you give me a context and I'll tell you what success is. I guess success for me right now for where I am is just contributing to the conversation in this AI space and getting people to think more carefully about ethics. It's aspirational to want to say like success is solving these problems, but I think I'll count myself as successful if my work in some way does more than we characterized earlier as just talking to the community of philosophers.
And how about in the context of money? Because as someone who's in academia, I imagine that you do have to apply for grants that can fund research and fund your work that allows you to have an impact and do the things that you want to do.
Fortunately, that is not the case. So I don't have to apply for grants for funding. We do occasionally because if there's some project we really want to accomplish, but we need resources, we will apply for grants. But for some reason, as a leftover of days gone by, the humanities are largely funded. I mean, the funding is not great, so it's not like the sciences, but we are funded partly in order to enable us to explore what we want without worry about whether it's amenable to grant funders. So while money is a concern for us, and philosophy departments always need more money, and ethicists could always use more money, and we always think we would be better in a better expense than many other things, it's not a dominant factor. It's something we can sort of set aside mostly.
And any parting thoughts that you want to leave with the Inspired Money listener?
I'll just say, maybe, is it okay if I give a little plug?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So my colleague, Ron Sandler, and I at the Ethics Institute at Northeastern recently published in collaboration with Accenture a guide for developing ethics oversight committees. And it's not an answer to the question of how to do it, but it motivates why the committee is so useful for solving these kinds of subtle, nuanced problems, and the questions you can start asking as an organization to build up the infrastructure to answer them. And we're available as resources. You should feel free to look us up on the internet and reach out, look at the report, reach out to us for further help.
Well, thanks, John. Can you tell the Inspired Money listener where to find out more about you and follow you?
Sure. You can find my website at johnbasl, JOHNBASL.net. And you'll find links there to a lot of my work and some of my more public work, especially. And you'll be able to find a link to that report in the near future.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Andy.
So what was your favorite Inspired Money moment? I like the idea of keeping an open mind to more things. I had heard about Target and its AI sending the pregnant customer ads before she knew it, but I'd forgotten all about it. It's a great reminder to just be aware of the technology being used by companies and to view technology through an ethical lens. My favorite Inspired Money moment was when John said that our ethical world can be too narrow or short-sighted. So look at ethics in a way that can take care of yourself, but go broader than that so that you can make a bigger impact. If you had a different favorite Inspired Money moment or thoughts on today's topic, I hope to see you in the Inspired Money Makers Facebook group at inspiredmoney.fm/Facebook. Thank you so much for joining us today. See you next time. The music you're listening to right now and all other music on today's show is by the amazing Jim Kimo West. Have an inspired week and do something that scares you, because that's where the magic happens.